Shalom. Ado Shem Echaim. English? English? Do not worry, Ado Shem Echaim. It means, may the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
I am Joseph, son of Jacob. I believe you know my son. Yes?
Yes.
He's been a good boy, I trust? Yes? And my wife, Mary, yes? Yes? Many have asked why there is so little written about me in your scriptures. Yes, and I tell them the answer is simple. Your scriptures are not about me. They're about my son, yes?
Yes.
Some have asked why not one word I have ever spoken is recorded in your scriptures. It has prompted some to suggest that perhaps I am a mute. That's why you can plainly hear they were wrong, yes?
Yes.
But one woman did say, she said, well, if he is a mute, it makes sense, because they have called him the perfect husband. We have some married people here, yes? Well, I tell you, I am perfect at nothing, but I do strive for perfect devotion to God, because I was raised that way. My father Jacob taught me that I am to devote my entire life, everything I do, to God, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I have been called a great many things throughout history. Have you heard them?
No.
Yeah, well, protector of the faith, the defender of the Christ child.
Yes.
Do you know that some have even called me saint? Yeah. I was not surprised to learn that they do not call you saint until long after anyone who could have ever possibly known you on earth was long dead. Of all that I have been called, I do have one favorite. Would you like to know what it is?
Yes.
Throughout the 2,000 years, I have one favorite. Papa. Papa. And would it surprise you to learn that he calls me Papa to this very day? Yes. And I will tell you, he said Papa long before he ever said Mama. Well, he was a very bright child, he was. Well, I was born in Bethlehem. Did you know this? The same as my son. But when I was young, my father moved our entire family, save two older brothers who were married. They stayed in Bethlehem. He moved us all to Nazareth in Galilee. And it is in Nazareth that I was raised. But more important, it is in Nazareth where I met Mary. Yes. We were children together. We would laugh together and have fun together, play as children would play. And I will tell you something of Mary. Mary had a smile that when she would walk into a room, she would smile and the room itself would light up. Have you known people like this?
Yes.
Yes, well, this was Mary. And I will tell you something else about her, but you must promise you will never tell her I told you.
Right.
Yes?
Right.
Mary loved to laugh. And she had a laugh that was contagious. But when she began to laugh, she could not control it. She could not stop the laughing. And later, when we were married, I used to use that. When she was mad at me for something, as rare as that might seem. Do I look like someone who would do things wrong? As rare as that would be, I knew how to make Mary laugh, and I would make her laugh, and she would begin to laugh, and she would forget what she was mad about. Yes? But then she was mad at me for making her laugh, so I lost both ways, I think, yes? Well, I believe that it was at a funeral. It was the funeral for my mother that I first realized that Mary was important to me. I was standing there, I remember, greeting people. I was a man now. I was 14 years of age. You are a man in my tradition at 13 years. Did you know this?
No.
Yes. So I was a man. I was 14, and I had to be strong because, you see, men do not cry. And so I was being strong and meeting people and greeting people. Well, Mary came over to me, and she looked at me, and she said, Joseph, this day is for your mother. Why do you not cry? I know how you loved your mother. And then she took my hand and held it in hers, and she said, cry, Joseph. Cry for your mother. And do you know that just as she took my hand, I began to cry. I learned that Mary, although just 9, was wise well beyond her years. We were both very pleased to learn a few years later, that her father and mine had decided that we should become betrothed. Now, our betrothal is different than, what is that called today before you are married? Engagement. Yes, it's different than engagement. You see, with a betrothal, you are married. It is a contract of marriage. You are married in every way save two. One, you do not know one another intimately, and you do not live under the same roof. But beyond that, you are contractually married. And the betrothal is 1 year's time. And at the end of that 1 year, the men gather together, they parade down the street to the woman's house. He takes her from her parents' house back to his house, and then they are married. It is a celebration, yes? There are only two ways to break this contract of marriage under our law. One, if you find that the woman has been disloyal to you, you may bring her before a judge and present your evidence, and if the judge finds her guilty, he very well may sentence her to death, and they take her out and stone her to death. And you may not know that many times the evidence is only the word of the husband. Yes. Now, the second way, yes. Are you frightened by that prospect? The second way under our law is if the man and the woman should together decide that they would like this writ of divorcement, they may go before two witnesses and present their reasons. Those witnesses could grant that writ of divorcement. They are then divorced and they go their own ways. Yes? Different than your engagement. Yes? Yes. Well, Mary and I were betrothed. And shortly after we became betrothed, Mary came to me and she said, Joseph, I need to speak to you about something of great importance. And I said, yes, Mary. She said, meet me at the place we go. We had a place, Mary and I, where we would go. It was on the side of the hill in Nazareth on some rocks, and we were hit. No one could see us when we were sitting on those rocks. And you see, in my day, when you were betrothed, the betrothed could not go off on their own. They were followed. People were with them all the time. We had chaperones, yes? And so, but we knew how to get away. And we had our place on the rocks, and that is where we would go to talk and to share and to discuss our life together. Do people still today have places they go? Yes, well, that Mary had, it was on the rocks. So we met on those rocks, and Mary looked at me and she said, Joseph, I do not know how to tell you this. I am frightened. And I said to her, now, Mary, don't be frightened. There is nothing you could say that would change my love for you. I love you more than anyone. You and I are to be wed. Yes, please, just tell me. And she looked at me and she said, Joseph, I am with child. Well, I tell you, I was stunned. But I knew one thing, that Mary was not with child of her own accord. She would not have done this. She would not have shamed herself, her father, or me for that matter. It was not Mary. So I asked her, I said, the Romans who are in our country, who are controlling our country, were known to take young Jewish girls and have their way with them, to attack them, to rape them. I asked her, I said, was it one of the Romans? Did they attack you? And she said, I have been with no man, Joseph. Well, I said to her, I do not understand. She said, I can only tell you this. I had a vision, she said. And in my vision, heavenly beings came and told me that I was carrying a child of the heavens. And that is all I can tell you, Joseph. Well, I told her that I did not understand what she was telling me. I did not understand it. It was beyond me, but I did know this, that somehow, even though it was beyond my understanding, Mary was telling me the truth. Because Mary could not and would not lie. I know her too well. As children, we knew each other. She could not lie. So she was telling me the truth, but I could not understand. So I told her, I will go home and I will pray and ask God for a direction. You see, I was raised by my father Jacob to pray. During good times and bad, always go to God, turn to God, and ask for direction, yes? So I left her that day, and I went home, and do you know that I was away from her for 1 week's time? And every day I prayed, almost all day, asking God, please tell me what you would have me do. Well, at the end of that 1 week, I had decided. I decided that in the morning I would go to Mary, and I would tell her that we will go before 2 witnesses and ask for a writ of divorcement. And that way we could divorce one another, and she could go on her way and do whatever it was that God would have her do. You see, my reason for offering to divorce her was not because I did not love her. I loved Mary with all my heart. But it was because I loved her and because I believed her. You see, I believed that God had so ordained, and I knew that I had no place in it. I was not worthy. Have you ever made a decision in your life but felt somewhere or somehow it was wrong? Yes? Well, that is how I felt. I felt in my stomach, I think, that this was the wrong decision. And I got into bed and I tossed and I could not sleep. And finally, when I fell asleep, I had a vision. I had a vision, and heavenly beings came to me, and they said that Mary has told you rightly. And they said, be not afraid, Joseph, son of David, for the child that she carries is of the Holy Spirit. And the heavens want you to raise that child as your own and to name him Jesus. When the vision ended, I woke. And I don't think I was ever so excited in my life, because I never wanted to divorce Mary. And I knew in my heart that this was from God. And so I did what I do when I am excited. I paced. You see, I wanted to go to Mary's house, but it was the middle of the night, and I couldn't. I had to wait for first light. So I paced. I walked back and forth, and all through the night, I was out of bed, walking back and forth, because I wanted to go to Mary and beg her forgiveness for even considering divorce, yes? Well, at first light, I ran to her house. Now, her house is 362 paces from mine. Yes, well, I know that because as children we would play and we would count. We would count 1, 2. We knew how many paces it was to all of our friends' house. Children do that. Do you count? Yes, they know. You count and you know how many. And we knew how. That day I made that over 362 paces in less than 100. I ran. I was excited. And when I arrived at her house, her father, Joachim, was there, and I said, Joachim, I must speak to Mary. May I please speak with her privately? Well, the heavens must have spoken to him, because he said yes. And Mary and I, we went back to our place, our rocks, and we sat there, and I said to her this. I said, Mary, you must please forgive me. I had planned to come here this day to tell you that I had decided we should become divorced. But Mary, I had a vision not dissimilar to yours, and in mine the heavenly beings appeared and said that the child you are carrying is of the Holy Spirit. And they want me to be its father and to raise him as my own. Will you forgive me, Mary? She stood and she put her arms around me and she said, there is nothing to forgive, my husband. There is no one on this earth I want to raise this child with other than you. Heavens be blessed. I was given the most beautiful, wonderful woman I think that he had ever created. Well, then I said to her, I said, we should go and talk to your father and ask if we could become married now and not wait the traditional 1 year of betrothal. And so we did, and we went and spoke to Joachim, and you know, he must have had his own vision, because he said yes. And he did not even ask any questions. Well, the day came, and all the men gathered at my house, my friends, and we paraded down the streets of Nazareth. We came to Mary's house. I took her from her father and back to my house. And then, do you know, we had a celebration that lasted 1 week's time. Yes? And at the end, we were married. And from that point on, we lived as a married couple. It was wonderful, yes? Yes. Well, soon after we had become married, I received a notice that I was to go with my family to Bethlehem, where I was born, for a census. And I tell you, I did not want to go. I did not want to go. It was a 100-mile trip to Bethlehem, and the roads were very bad, and the weather was very bad, and beside that, Mary was pregnant. In fact, she was very pregnant. Yeah. I've never understood that word. Very. You are either pregnant or you are not. Am I right? Yes. Well, let me tell you, Mary was a lot pregnant. She was a lot. And so I decided we would not go. Well, I went to Mary, and I said, Mary, I received word that we were to go to Bethlehem for a census. And I've decided that we are not going to go. It is too long and hard a journey, and you are pregnant. We are not going to go. Well, Mary looked at me, and she said, well, Joseph, we are Jews, are we not? And I said, well, yes, of course we are. And she said, we are good Jews. And I said, we strive to be, yes. And she said, as good Jews, we follow Mosaic law. Is that right? And I said, well, yes, Mary. And she said, well, in Mosaic law, it says we are to follow the law as set down by Moses, but we are also to follow the law of the land. And if the law of the land says that we are to go to Bethlehem for a census, then we must go. I never liked it when she used the law against me. So I said to her, Mary, fine, we will go. And then I said, how am I going to make this trip? I said, I will go to my father and ask to borrow a donkey. See, we did not even have a donkey. We were very modest. In our entire marriage, we had very little. So I went to my father and I asked to borrow a donkey, and he said yes, and I brought it, and I built did you know that I'm a builder? Yes. Yeah, well, I built a seat on that donkey for Mary to sit. And then we started off on that long trip to Bethlehem. Now, it took much longer than I had planned. The weather was very bad, and the terrain was bad, but Mary kept having to stop. She needed rest time, and she kept reminding me she was pregnant. and it took longer, and when we arrived in Bethlehem, I had planned to stay with one of my brothers at their house. But when we arrived at their house, there was no room because our relatives came in from everywhere else, and there was no room. So my brother said, there is an inn that we recommend to you. You go there and find a room. And so I said, thank you. And we started to go to the inn that was recommended. And Mary kept getting down off that donkey. And I told her that she must get back up onto that donkey because Bethlehem normally has 100 or 200 people, yes? There were 2,000 or 3,000 there registering for the census. It was crowded. And I said, Mary, you are pregnant. They will knock you and jostle you and push you. You must get on that donkey and stay safe. I remember this for one important reason. I think it is the last time in our marriage she did exactly what I said without any argument. And she got onto that donkey. Well, we made the trip and got to the inn. Now I said, now Mary, you just stay there on that donkey. I will go in and talk to the keep. And I went in and I called over the keep and I said, we need a room for the night. And he said, I am sorry, but I have no room. And I said, we have traveled a great distance all the way from Nazareth. I said, we need a room. My wife is there, and she's very... That's when you say very, when you're negotiating, yes? I said, she is very pregnant, and he said, I am sorry, we have nothing. Well, I thanked him, and I started to leave. The heavens must have touched his heart. Because he said, just one moment. He said, if you would like, I would be pleased to let you use a cave that I have behind the inn where we keep the animals. It will get you at least out of the weather. Will that work? And I said, yes, that would be wonderful. Yes, thank you. And I went to tell Mary. Now, I want to tell you something. That innkeep has been spoken of poorly for many years. Am I right? Yes. Let me tell you, it is not his fault that we were late. It was mine. It is not his fault that there were so many people and he had no rooms. It was not his fault. And heavens be blessed, he at least offered us a place. And in my day, a cave is not uncommon. We had friends in Nazareth who lived in caves, so it was not uncommon. We were very thankful and pleased to have it. In fact, that night when we unpacked our things and lay down to bed, we both, on our knees, gave thanks and praise to God and asked God's blessings on that innkeep for providing us this place. Yes? Well, we went to sleep that night. In the morning, I woke up, and do you know what Mary was doing? She was cleaning. She was clear. This is where animals live, and Mary is clearly, she's moving the animals over there, and she's moving this over there, and this over there, and she goes and gets a trough, a manger where the animals eat, and she moves it to the center of the cave just about, and then takes the old hay out, and goes and gets new hay, and puts it in, and then she takes one of my tunics, my best tunic. I only have two. And she takes my tunic and she laid it in that manger, and at that point I said, Mary, what on earth are you doing? That is my best tunic. And she said, Joseph, if you cannot help and keep your mouth closed, then just get out of my way. I had never seen Mary like this. So I was happy to leave, and I left. Well, later that day, she called to me. And she said, Joseph, come back in quickly. And I ran back in. And I said, yes, what is it, Mary? And she said, it's time. It's time. And I said, yes. Time for what? Well, what do I know about bringing babies into this world? Men in my day have nothing to do with the birth of a child. Do they today?
Yes.
Yes. Why? Why? We had nothing to do with it, and so I stood there and said, time for what? And she said, I am ready, Joseph, to give birth. And I said, yes. Well, I did not know what to do, and I stood there, and then she got mad, and she said, Joseph, I need help. Go and find some help, please. You may not know this, but in my day, giving birth was the #1 cause of death for young girls. And so I said, yes, I will go. You see, back in Nazareth, her friends, the girls who lived around, their good friends, they would have helped her, but there was no one we knew, and my brothers lived on the other side of Bethlehem. I never would have gotten to them in time. And so she said, Mary said, why don't you go to the innkeep? He may know of someone, yes? So I went to the keep, and I asked if he knew of anyone to help, and he said he knew of a young girl who lived just 2 or 3 streets away. So he went and got her, brought her back, and I took her to Mary, and I said, Mary, this young girl has had experience at this. And Mary said, thank you, now get out. That's twice in one day I was kicked out. Well, I left, and I went out, and let me tell you, I was happy to leave, yeah? Now, when I was outside, I did what I do when I'm nervous. What is that? Yes, it was. I was pacing. Now, I thought this was going to be fast. Well, she said she was ready to give birth, yes? Do you know it took hours? It took hours. And I paced, and the other thing I tell you I do when I am nervous, if I see a rock, a stone, or a piece of wood, I pick it up. Because I told you I'm a builder. I like working with rocks and wood, and I found a piece of wood this day, and I picked it up, and I began to carve on it with a knife. And when I start carving, I never know what it's going to be until I am finished. Well, I'm carving on this and pacing back and forth. Again, it was hours they're in there, and I don't know what they're doing. And at one point, I had finished carving, and I realized that I had carved a whistle. You say a whistle. And I decided that this was going to be the first gift that I would give to my son. And as I was standing there admiring my good work, I heard the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. I heard my son screaming. Yeah. And then I heard Mary call to me, and I ran in, and I arrived in just in time to see that young girl cut the cord. And then she set my son on a cloth and put salt on his skin. That is what we do in my day to protect the skin. And then she wrapped him in that cloth, and she wrapped him too tightly. And I said, do not wrap my son that tightly. I said, he will not be able to breathe. And that young girl looked at me, and she said, have you ever wrapped a newborn child? And I said, no. She said, then you keep your mouth closed. I know what I'm doing. I did not do very well with women on this day. Well, after she wrapped him, she began to hand him to me. And I said, no. What do I know about holding little babies? And so I'm only 19. I know next to nothing. And so she handed him to Mary. And I tell you, I have never in my life seen a more beautiful sight than to see Mary there holding and rocking our son. Well, after a while, I was speechless. I could say nothing. Mary kicked me, and she said, don't you think you should tell this girl thank you and let her go home? And I said, yes. And I said, thank you, and she left. Then Mary and I sat, and we just looked at each other and looked at our new son. But then Mary started to get tired. You know how when you're tired, your eyes start to close, and then you fight it, and you open them, and they close, and you open? Yes? Well, this is what Mary is doing. And I said, Mary, you are tired. We have traveled a great distance. You have given birth. You lie down and go to sleep. Well, do you know, she lay right down and fell fast asleep. But now I became nervous. What would happen if she rolled over? She could suffocate my son. I said, I will not, no. And so I'll go get that girl. She'll know what to do. And I started to leave. But then I thought, I am that child's father. I will protect him. And so I went back, and I knelt down, and I picked him up. And for the first time in my life, I held my son. And I tell you, he did not cry. He did not even cry. Hello. Yes. Yes, he's cute, yes? The first thing I did was I loosened that cloth. It was too tight. He could barely breathe. I could tell by looking at his face. And I loosened that cloth, and do you know what happened? His little hand came up. It was the cutest hand I think I have ever seen. Did you know that little babies are born with nails? Yes, I did not know this. And he had the best looking nails I think I have ever seen. Hello. And then I'm saying, welcome to our world. Yes, we are so pleased that you are here, your mother and me. And then I said, wait, I have something for you. And I pulled this. I said, you see this? I said, I made this for you just today while you were being born. I made this for you. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it said. Can a newborn baby smile? Yes. I believed he smiled. He yes, that is a good sound. I said, and you will learn to play that and play songs for your mother and me. Well, it was the most wonderful feeling I ever had in my life to hold my son. Yes, hello. Well, I knew he was getting tired. So I brought him over and I set him in that manger that Mary had cleaned and made fresh with my tunic, and somehow it did not matter to me that it was my best tunic. And then I covered him up, and I sat back and I just watched until I fell asleep. I would tell you, it was, I think, for me, the best night of my entire life. Well, the next morning, we were awakened with noises. There were people standing at the entrance of the cave. They were shepherds. And I went to them and I said, what are you doing? We're trying to sleep in here. We have a newborn child. And they said that they had been out tending their flocks last night, and heavenly beings appeared to them and said that the Messiah had been born, and they were to follow the star, and it led them to this place. And when they saw our baby there, they walked right into the cave, and do you know, they dropped down onto their knees and began to pray before our son. Now put yourself in my position, where people who you do not even know are telling you that they were directed to your son, and they come and kneel and pray just before your son. Well, on the 8th day, in accordance with our law, is the day of circumcision and naming. And I performed the ceremony, and I circumcised my son. And then, as I was directed in the dream, I named him Jesus. Yes. And then on the 40th day, which according to our law is the day of presentation at the temple, I took Mary and Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem, and I presented them. Well, an older man named Simeon, I found out, came up to us. And he did not even look at Mary or me. He just looked at our son. And he told us that years before, he had been told by God in a dream that he would not die until with his own eyes he saw the Messiah. And he said, upon looking at our son, that prophecy had been fulfilled. And you know, another woman, Anna, came over, and she did the same thing. And they both began to pray before us to our son. Well, I took Mary and Jesus home to Nazareth. But in accordance with our law, every year on Passover, we went to Jerusalem. We did it in Jesus' first year and in his second year. And while we were there in his second year, we decided we would go and visit my brothers in Bethlehem. And that's what we did. And while we were at their house, Jesus, I remember, is 2 now, was playing. And Mary, I think, was off preparing food. A caravan came forward, and there were many animals in it, and many people. There were slaves, but 3 men, very wealthy by their appearance, got off, and they came to the door of our house, and the moment they saw Jesus, they walked in, and do you know, they lay flat on their stomachs in front of our son. And Mary came running out to see what was happening, and she said, "What is going on?" And I said, "I do not know." And then they began to give us gifts. One gave us gold, another frankincense, and another myrrh. And Mary said, "Joseph, you tell them we cannot accept those gifts. They are much too valuable." And I told her, I said, "Mary, they are not for us. They are for Jesus." And she said, "You tell them right now that we cannot accept them." So I said, "I'm sorry, we cannot accept these wonderful gifts because they are much too valuable for us." And they said that we must accept them, because they had traveled 1,200 miles from the east following a star to give them to our son. Can you imagine this? And then they said this. They said, "We'll tell you one other thing. We met with your King Herod," they said, "and he wants your son dead. And he has put out a decree that all children 2 years of age and younger, men, boys, are to be killed. So you must be careful." Well, they left us that day. And that night, I remember, before I went to sleep, I prayed to God for direction. I said, "Is there any truth in what they have said to us? What should I do, dear Lord?" I had another vision. And in that vision, the heavenly being said that what they have told me was true, that Herod wanted my son dead, and I am to take Mary and Jesus that very night into Egypt. Now, I tell you, I was raised by my father to listen to God, to pray to God, listen to God, and when God says something to you, I am to say yes. And so there was no doubt as to what I was going to do. I believed in my heart this was God speaking to me. So I went and I woke Mary, and I told her of the vision, and we packed Jesus and our things, and we left that very night. Because that is what I was raised to do, to listen to God and to obey at all times God. We spent 3 years, nearly, in Egypt. It was the worst time of my life. I did not like it. It was very difficult, the trip. The terrain was very rough. There were factions that were fighting, and it was very hard for me to find work to help sustain ourselves. Now, you might ask yourself, how did we last for 3 years in Egypt? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They are valuable. Do not tell me for a moment that God does not provide. Even when we do not know He is providing, He provides. Yes. Well, at the end of 3 years, I had a vision, and the vision said that King Herod was dead, and I could take my family back home to Nazareth, and that is what I did. But I tell you, I complained the entire time we were in Egypt. I did. I was complaining, this, that, and Mary was tired of it. And Mary said to me, she said, "Joseph, did you not tell me that you are named for the patriarch, Joseph?" And I said, "Well, yes." And she said, "Don't I remember from Scripture that Joseph, the patriarch, was taken into Egypt, and just as we?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "As I remember Scripture, he was a slave." And I said, "Well, yes, Mary, that's right." She said, "You are a free man, so you stop your complaining." I never liked it when she would use Scripture against me. Well, I took them back to Nazareth. Now, I will tell you, our house in Nazareth was on the side of a hill, and it was made of white mud brick with a thatched roof, and it had 3 rooms in it. And I tell you that for a reason. You see, I had a habit. Do men have habits today?
Oh,
Yes. Well, I would collect things. Is that what they do? I collect things. If I found things on the side of the road, rocks or wood, or I would collect it and I would bring it home. And do you know that I had one of those rooms nearly filled with these things? And Mary would tell me, now Joseph, you've cleaned that room. Get those things out. You're making a mess of my house. You clean that room. And I would argue with her. And I would say, "Mary, I need these things for my work." See, you know I'm a builder, but some of you think I'm a carpenter. Is that right? Well, you may not know this, in Nazareth, there is very little wood. Very little wood. So, in fact, when I made once a small boat for a family, I had to use 3 different types of wood because there was very little wood. So if someone wanted me to make something and I needed wood, I would have to buy it. And as I told you, we were modest and had very little money. So if I found wood or things on the side of the road, I picked it up and brought it home because I could use it for my business. Does that make sense to you? Well, it did not make sense to Mary. And she said, I want it clean. And you know that I told her time and time again, all through our marriage, that I would clean that room. I don't think I ever did. I wanted to, and I planned to, but I never did. Now, I earned a living for my family by traveling each day 3.5 miles to a town called Sepphoris, which was the capital city of Galilee. And King Herod, the son of the one who wanted my son dead, was rebuilding it as a beautiful Roman city. And he was hiring builders like me to rebuild it, and I was very pleased to have that work. And I would walk 3.5 miles in the morning and come back 3.5 miles. Well, when Jesus was old enough, he would go off when Mary was preparing the meal, and we showed him where our place was, those rocks. And he would sit up there and he would watch. From up there you could see the entire valley. You could see most all of Galilee, I think. And he would watch for me. And then when he saw me coming, he would yell to me. He'd say, Papa, I'm here, I am here. And we would get together and we would hug. And then, when he was even older, he would think he was smart. And I would walk home and he would be down the hill hiding behind rocks and did not think I saw him. And then when I went past those rocks, he would jump out to scare me. And every time I pretended I was scared. Because that's what fathers do, yes? Yes. Well, when he was old enough, he would come with me every day to Sepphoris. And it is on that 3.5 miles that I taught him his prayers, and I taught him the Torah. And in Sepphoris, I taught him my trade. I taught him to be a builder. And you know, he became a good builder. In fact, a woman I remember came and said that she would like her chair repaired. And I said, fine, I will have this for you in 2 weeks' time. And she said, would you mind asking your son to do it? That's not funny. I taught him everything he knew, and he was taking business from me. Well, many times on that walk to and from Sepphoris, we would stop and we would sit, and as I said, I taught him his Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I taught him to memorize all 5 of those books. He could repeat everything in those books, yes. As my father taught me, and his father taught him, and his father taught him. It is our custom. I also taught him his prayers. Would you like to know the very first prayer I ever taught Jesus? Yes. Yes. Shema Israel, Adoshem Elokeinu, Adoshem Echad. Repeat. Shema Israel, Adoshem Elokeinu, Adoshem Echad. It means, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Heavens be blessed. You have prayed the first prayer I was taught, the first prayer my father was taught, his father was taught, and the first prayer I taught Jesus. I suspect it is the first prayer that young Jewish boys are taught to this very day. Heavens be blessed. You have prayed that first prayer. Well, Jesus would ask questions on that trip. He would see sheep in the field and see a shepherd come, and the shepherd would call to his sheep, and he would see how just some of the sheep would come out of the flock and follow the shepherd. And Jesus would ask me, he said, how is that those sheep knew to follow that one shepherd? And I said, well, because they have grown accustomed to hearing his voice and knowing his voice. And then I would tell him, it is that way with God. That is why we are to pray to God daily, so that we know God's voice when God speaks to us. So when we hear him speak, we can answer and say yes. And then something else I did that Mary would be mad at is I used to write in the dirt. See, we didn't have much money, so if I wanted to think about it, something I was going to build, I used to draw it out in the dirt to think about it. Well, do you know, Jesus started to copy me and do that. And Mary would be angry, saying, why are you teaching him to write in the dirt? And I said, well, Mary, and I always lost those arguments. When Jesus was 12 years of age, we were preparing to make that annual trip on Passover to Jerusalem. Mary and I decided it was on this trip that we would tell him who he was. You see, as I told you, in my custom, you were a man at 13, yes? Well, he is 12, nearly 13. It is time for him to know. This was very difficult, especially for me, because I had to tell him that I was not his father. So we made that trip, and we sat him down, and we told him everything we knew of his birth, the visions that we had, the people who came, who were directed to him by the stars, by the heavens who came. We told him everything we knew. Well, when we left Jerusalem, it was on our way back home that I went to Mary and asked if she had seen Jesus. I thought that Jesus was with her, and she said, no, I thought he was with you. Did you know that men and women travel in separate caravans? Yes, they do, but they come together for meals. And so at meals, I thought he was with Mary. She thought he was with me. And she said, no, I had not seen him. So we said, let's ask friends. And we asked, and no one had seen him since Jerusalem. So I became frightened. And I said, we must retrace our steps and try to find him. What kind of a father loses his son? I told you that I was not worthy. Well, we retraced our steps, and we met on the steps of the great temple, and neither of us had found him. So I said to Mary, I said, let us go into the temple, and let's pray to God and ask for direction. And we went into the temple. Do you know what we saw? Our son was there. He was in the temple. He was sitting there. He was talking to the teachers and the rabbis. He was asking questions. They were answering. They were asking questions. He was answering. We were astounded to see this. And we ran to him and we put our arms around him and said, we have been so frightened. But then Mary let him have it. She said, how dare you? What on earth do you think you were doing? Don't you ever do this again? And she went on and on and on. And I said, Mary, just... And then Jesus said this. He said, where else would you expect to find me but in my Father's house? Don't you see, we had just told him who he was. It should have made sense to us that he would need time to understand. Yes? Well, we left and went home. And as your scripture says, Jesus grew in age, and he grew in faith, and he grew in wisdom. And he grew well by standards of men. It was a few years later that I was given a fever. Now, in my day, we have big fevers and we have small fevers. I was given a great fever, and I knew that I was to die. And I began to question God. I asked God why he was taking me now before Jesus came into his glory. Had I done something wrong? Was it losing his son? What did I do wrong? Dear God, I was praying to him. Well, after I died, God allowed me to see what they did to my son. How they beat him, and how they scourged him, and how they put nails into his body. How they crucified and murdered him. And don't you see, God knew. God knew that if I were still on the earth, I would have done everything I could have to have prevented it. I could not have let them do that to my son. That was my boy. It was my little boy. Don't you see, God knew that it was the time to take me. God always knows the right time. Yes? He knows. Trust in God. As I was laying dying, Mary and Jesus were with me, I think, all the time. And once Jesus got into bed with me, and he put his arms around me. And he said, I want you to know something, Papa. He said, you are my father. You are my father. And then he said, I have something for you. And he gave me this. This is not the one I made for him. He lost that years ago. This is one he made for me. He said, Papa, as you made me a gift when I entered into this world, I made this as you enter into the next. I'm going to leave you with two thoughts. One, God spoke to me because I am one of his children, but you too are his children. And I tell you, God speaks to you. But are you listening? In our scriptures, we have Elijah going to the side of the mountain to find God. Do you know of this? And he looked for God in the thunder and the lightning and in the quaking of the earth. But where did he find God? In the gentle breeze, in the whisper. God speaks to you as he did to me in your quiet time. Listen for God. And when he speaks to you, say yes. Say yes. And lastly, we have been called a holy family. Have you heard this? Yes. Well, what does holy mean? Holy means set apart. You have an altar, yes? That altar is holy because it is set apart for one thing, and that is to give praise, glory, and honor to God. We have in my day in the temple the Holy of Holies. That is one room that is entered only once a year, and it is where we keep the 10 Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant. This is a holy place because it is set apart, yes? If my family is holy, it is because I have set them apart and raised them up on a daily basis before God. You too have been called to be a holy family. I ask you now to make your families holy. You husbands, you raise up your wives and your children on a daily basis to God. Ask his blessings on that family. And wives, you raise up your husbands and your children before God and ask his blessings on a daily basis. And children, you raise up your parents before God. You drop to your knees and ask God's blessings on your parents, because that is how we set each other apart and make our families holy, yes? Adoshem Echaim. Shalom. Shalom.